I'm back with another solo episode today, and it's going to be a follow-up to last week's episode, which was an Ask Me Anything. You guys submitted questions. I couldn't get to all of them in that episode, so I broke it up into two, and I kind of categorized them. So last week's was more about reactivity, being able to pause in the moment, tactical or like tangible tools that you can use in the moment to do that. So I can't remember what else I answered, but anyways, there was questions around reactivity, not reacting, being able to stay calm, what we need to stay calm. Calm is not a passive state. It's really active and hard. It doesn't mean that you're being permissive and avoidant. So check that one out if that feels like it might be helpful to you. And today, this is an interesting one. I'm always reluctant to answer these types of questions, but I'm going to do it today because I figured the questions, I should just at least say it this way, the questions that you guys asked all sort of center around my opinion on different parenting styles, different approaches, different people in the field, phrases, trends, things like that. And I honestly usually don't weigh in, and I'll tell you why. I always sort of, when I had initially decided that I wanted to create the parenting reframe or create this space, I didn't even know what it was going to be called. At the time, I started off calling it Kiddos and Insights, and then it shifted throughout the years and evolved. But I had always promised myself that the intention of the space was not to come on here and make anyone feel like there's a right way or wrong way of doing things. I really wanted to create a space where you could feel safe, seen, heard, and supported. And so I think if you sort of join the noisy voices of like, this is the wrong approach, this is the best approach, this is good, this is bad, it sort of is the antithesis of what I do and why I do it. So I will share with you on this episode what I feel about, for example, the biggest question I always get is like, how do you feel about gentle parenting? Do you teach gentle parenting? Like, is that sort of at the crux of how you coach? And so I will answer that one. And I'll also answer, I get a lot of questions about how I feel about the term, like highly sensitive kids, deeply feeling kids, defiant kids, and then weaving that into, does that mean my child is neurodivergent? I think that question comes up very often. So I want to make sure to answer that in a way where, again, I'm not here to disparage anybody's work. You know, I'll kind of start this off by telling this story. When I first started to grow I started to get more traction on TikTok in terms of audience growth. And it was surprising to me for sure, because I don't think I really shared anything that felt like groundbreaking, but I really just went on with the intention of being myself and sharing the wisdom that I had gained in the 23 years of working with kids. And partly like I felt like through the lens of parenting, I could share in a different way because my kids had been through it. I was not in it still. And I could give you the perspective of what it feels like on the other side and what we need to hold on to and work on, and what are things where we get really stuck in the weeds. So those were sort of the two pillars or frameworks that I sort of always kept in mind. So anyways, I share a post, it does really well, or a video, and somebody who is very well known in the parenting space, like she has a really big following. She was much further along than me and still is. And she started going into my comments. It makes me laugh even. And she was like poking holes. Like she was trying to basically say like, this is great, but you left this out. Or this is great, but I would have remembered to say it this way. And I was like, this is so interesting to me. And I never cared. Like I never deleted the comments. I didn't feel offended. I never answered her. Like it didn't matter in the sense of like, I was not bothered. But what I did walk away thinking is, it's interesting to me that she must have felt like maybe I was a threat. I don't know. Like, I don't know if she was thinking to herself like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to get in here and show people a different way of seeing things. I don't know. It was really interesting and strange all at the same time to me. So it didn't bother me. Again, nothing was like terribly mean what she was saying. She was just kind of like there and like subtly saying like, yeah, but you didn't say this, and kind of like micromanaging all my posts. And it stopped, and partly because I think nobody really gave it legs. But I just thought it was a really interesting way to be. And I kind of said to myself in that moment that no matter where this goes, where it evolves to, what the space ends up being or what it looks like, I won't do that. I just have better ways of using my time, and like bringing other people's work down, disparaging somebody's work, even if I'm in total disagreement with it, it brings no value to anyone. So I say that story and I start this way because as I share my thoughts on these things, I will explain to you why I very rarely take a yes or no position on these types of things, because they are much more complex than I love this approach, I don't like this approach. So I think one of the things we try to do a lot in the parenting parenting space is say like, this is the right way, this is the wrong way, this is good, this is bad. And there's a lot of sort of binary thinking. And for me, I think the less we do that, the better, because if we can just understand sometimes that things have complexity, and we are smart people and loving people who can look at things with complexity and figure them out, then we don't have the desire to always simplify things into very easy, simple yeses and nos, but instead we can go, well, here's something that really resonates with me, and this part of this approach feels good, and I think I can grab that. Maybe this part I don't need, right? And I think if we can look at it that way, you'll make the shifts that you need, and you'll start to trust yourself. Because I do think in parenting, one of the things we often do is seek the advice of others, which is fair because it's overwhelming and there's a lot happening, and I'm in this space for that reason. However, I always say this to my clients too, like, you know best. You have the answer. I might be giving you tools, I might be giving you ideas and strategies, or maybe bringing light to things that maybe you hadn't seen before, but you are inherently the person who knows your child best and knows how to connect with them better than anyone else, and you do have all of that inside of you. So sometimes when you're feeling really depleted and you're feeling like you've got to just find all these resources and whatnot, sometimes like even just in stillness, sometimes you can reach a point of knowing, like, I think I know what this is showing me, or I think I know what I'm being asked to look at. So just know that. So here we go. With all of that in mind, let's get to it. So the first one that I always get asked is, how do you feel about gentle parenting? So again, I think there are really good aspects to gentle parenting. This is how I feel about all parenting approaches. I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all parenting approach when it comes to raising kids and teens and tweens and everything in between. I think what you want to think about is what works for my child. In the same way, when I was a pediatric speech therapist or when I was a teacher, I could not do the exact same thing with every single child. It's impossible, right? So I think when we kind of put a box around ourselves and say, this is the way I have to do it, these are the exact scripts I have to use, this is the way I have to say it, you don't want to, that can become a little bit confining and restrictive. And going back to that idea of like, you inherently know your child better than anyone else. When we start to outsource that knowing and constantly pick up on tools outside of ourselves that are going to fix the problem or whatever the perceived problem is, we no longer rely on that inner voice. We no longer look for it or search for it. And that's what we want to do. We want to sort of get still and go like, what's my kid showing me here? What is the thing that feels really hard? Why can't I set that boundary and hold it? Why do I fall apart when they fall apart? Let's look at that for a second. What do they need from me? They really need some moments where they can work through this and know that they're okay. So how do I create that? So again, it's like looking at it more intentionally instead of just going, what does this approach say to do? And that's what I'm going to do. So with gentle parenting, here's what I really like about it. I love that it kind of encourages a regulated parent to approach the child. That's one of the things I advocate for mostly in my work. I like the idea that we remove sort of using fear and shame and yelling and all of these other things. We're not leveraging those things to get our kids to cooperate. Those to me feel really good. Here is where I think the challenge is sometimes when parents are implementing gentle parenting. I don't think the approach is intended to be implemented this way, but I think it becomes challenging in the implementation, because I think what ends up happening is in the gentle parenting model, there usually is this emphasis on teaching a lot to our kids. So we're always explaining, we're always telling them what to do, we're always talking. And if you guys know my stuff, like one of the things I'm really quick to say is like, stop talking so much. Stop explaining. Kids know why. Kids are smart. Kids understand 9 out of 10 times why they're experiencing a consequence, or why something can't continue, or why their time is up with the iPad. Like, kids know why. The why is not really wanting more information. The why is, why won't you change your answer? I always say that when kids get perseverative about asking why a million times after you've set a boundary, they're not really wanting more explanations. They're just wanting you to change your answer, or they're asking, why don't you just do it the way I want you to do it? So for me, gentle parenting will tend to take parents down the rabbit hole of being explainers and talkers. And for some kids, again, this is effective. So if you have a child and you can explain to them the why, and once they have that information, their behavior shifts as a result, then use it. I think that's fantastic. You have a child where that works, right? Some kids, for certainly a lot of the kids I've worked with, if they're a little stronger willed, if they tend to exhibit more defiance, things like that, the more we explain, the more we increase that defiance. So I also do believe this for most kids, that when we're dysregulated, or when kids are dysregulated, when we continue to talk to them in that moment, we only create more dysregulation, or we end up saying the thing that they want. So they stop being dysregulated because in some ways they sort of, something outside of them fixed it, right? Maybe we redirected and offered something better, or gave a solution that they hadn't thought of, but we're not really letting them go through it. So that's sort of my, in a nutshell, thought on gentle parenting. I don't, again, like I've seen people use it really successfully and have done great with it. I've seen people really struggle with it. So I don't think it's a approach problem. I think it's really about, what does your child need? What do they respond well to? Also, the other thing to ask yourself when you're kind of looking at different approaches or thinking about different ways to do things is like, what feels good to you? Like, I'll ask that a lot of times on a coaching call. Like, I'll want to know the family's parenting styles, because I want to get a sense of like, what's going to feel doable for you, right? So if I'm going to give you a tool or a strategy that you're inherently going to be like, I would never do that. I don't ever talk like that. I don't, sometimes we do have to push against that and welcome in some change, but in large, you want to adopt strategies and tools that feel doable, that feel like you, that feel like, oh, that makes sense. I could do that. I can get behind that, because kids see through it. So if you're like reading a script that you don't mean and you're just saying it, like, kids are not, they're over it. They're moving on real fast from that. They're not listening to the script anymore. So think about that too as you're like researching these things, but like, what can you in good faith like implement well, and it feels natural and you can get behind. So those are some things just to think about. So that is in a nutshell how I feel about gentle parenting. Again, not for it or against it, just totally depends on the child is the answer to that. So the other question that I tend to get frequently is like, how do I feel? Oh, this is the other style that I get asked about a lot too is attachment style. So there are a lot of people in the parenting space, in the psychology space, that really adopt attachment style, an attachment style kind of parenting style is what I'll call it. And I won't even get into the whole psychology of it because it's much more involved. But I think for me, again, the answer is going to be the same. You have to do what works for you. I think where attachment style or the attachment theory becomes challenging is like, let's say, for instance, you're a family where, both parents are working, you have demanding schedules, and let's say co-sleep isn't an option for you and you have to sleep train. Something like attachment theory would say, no, you have to stay with the child, right? There's co-sleeping. There's the biology of like the mother and the child always being close. We don't let the child cry when they're a baby. Like, there are a lot of different things like that. So I think sometimes when I look at it, the attachment theory itself, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with it. What I think is hard is like, in today's culture and society and the demands of everyday life, I think it's very challenging to do it. And I think what I find when people come to me for coaching who have been in the throes of trying to implement more of an attachment theory style, I think what I usually wind up with is like an extremely burnt out mom, sometimes a dad too, a very overwhelmed parent who feels like they're failing because in part it's hard to do. It's really, really hard to do. But again, if your situation allows for it and you find a lot of success with it and it feels really good to you and you're feeling like this is just, like, I have a close family member who does it and she loves it and her kids are great. And so, like, again, I'm not saying not to do it. I just think you have to assess and look at like your life, your structure, your setup. What do you want? What can you get behind? What feels good to you? And then again, grab parts of these approaches that feel good to you. If it's like being there for your child in distress, do it, right? Everyone would sort of encourage those things. So that's sort of my quick answer to the attachment theory one. We can unpack it in a bigger episode. I do want to have somebody come on, but I haven't found the right person, because I feel like every time I interview somebody or talk to somebody or look into their work who's very, very pro attachment theory, it can skew very judgy. So I don't think they mean it that way, but I think if I'm like putting myself in the shoe of the person in the shoes of the person who's listening to this podcast and they're overwhelmed and tired, and I have somebody come on saying like, if you're not sleeping with your child every night, you're doing a bad job. Like that, if that's what your takeaway is going to be, then I didn't do my job, because I don't want anyone feeling that way. And I also don't believe that. So that's sort of the quick answer, quick take on how I feel about that. The next question is always around this idea of like I think, well, let me start off by saying this. So I always call kids strong-willed kids, or I say strong-willed kids for a child who would be described as maybe defiant, maybe some challenging behaviors, a spirited child. They tend to be so smart and clever and funny, and they usually have really great personalities, like all the things, right? And I had somebody on Instagram one time say to me, I don't like that you say strong-willed. That's not really a nice way to describe them. And, we wouldn't say something like a shy child. I guess I think that was her analogy. Like we wouldn't use the term shy or something like that. Or if a child, I think it was something along the lines if her child was like a quote unquote weaker child. Like I think that was actually the word she used. Like we wouldn't say that. We wouldn't call them that. So it got me thinking because I thought to myself, it's an interesting statement and I've heard it before that like there's something inherently wrong with saying defiant or saying strong-willed. So I guess let me start here by unpacking my own feelings about this. So I think defiance is so healthy and I think it's necessary and I think it's great. So if you are looking at something and you say they're defiant and your internal response to that word is negative, bad, I don't like it, then I can see where you would say, like if somebody's saying that child's behavior is defiant, then I can see you having a very negative response to that description, right? Because it feels a little bit like you're calling them a name, maybe. I don't know. But I think of defiance as a need. Like we need people who understand how to embody it and express it in a healthy way. Defiance is healthy. We have to teach kids how to say no to things. We have to teach kids how to state their opinions in a healthy way. We have to teach kids, how to choose the right thing and how to not do the wrong thing. Like we want to sort of give kids the skills to do this. The problem with defiance isn't defiance itself. The problem is we don't know how to respond to it. So we tend to either match our child's dysregulation or we become defiant back. And then we have a pretty problematic dynamic going on at that point, and that child doesn't really learn how to embody their strong-willed self and how to express it in a very healthy, appropriate way. So that's how I feel about defiance. I think defiance is healthy. I've had this conversation with Joe Newman too, and he's actually the one who shed a lot of light on that for me. He's like, that's beautiful. It's a great thing. Like we need more people to push against systems. We need more people to disrupt things. Like what would life be if everyone just did the exact same thing? It's not really what we want. So one, let's remember that's how I think about defiance. Strong-willed to me is a beautiful thing too. I mean, why not have like if I align my will with things that are very aligned and good natured and they're helpful and productive and they support people and they're purposeful, then I want to be strong in that, right? I want to be strong-willed. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I want to be strong-willed and simultaneously understand how to meet the needs of the people around me. So my feeling is like if I'm saying somebody is strong-willed or a child is strong-willed and that bothers you, I think the reason it bothers you is because you have a story about that word, or you have defined that in a way where you're like strong-willed kids are bad. So now if I say somebody's strong-willed, you assume I'm saying their kid is bad, and that's not what I'm doing at all. I'm just naming it. So when we just name something, right, and I teach this a lot in coaching, like having complete neutrality around behavior. So instead of saying something like, let's say your child hits, and so we build a story around that, and we say, I must not be doing a good job. I have a kid who doesn't listen. I have a kid who's violent. I have a kid who doesn't have remorse. I have a kid who absolutely doesn't care. I have a kid who can't control their anger. So now we have all these stories around the event, the hitting itself, and so naturally we become reactive, right? Because the story is unbearable for us. That's why I teach PAR, because pausing, acknowledging, responding, and then reflecting helps us unpack the story, because that's what you're reacting to. So if I look at it with neutrality and just say, I have a child who hits anytime they feel frustrated. I have a child who hits, and I have to meet their needs and help them move through this. Then we can zoom that camera lens out, and now it's not about me and what I'm not doing or what I am doing. It's not about my kid being good or bad or how my child's being perceived by others. But I just know here's the behavior, And now I get to reflect and think about, how do I solve this? What do they need in that moment? What's the best way to do this for my child? So going back to this idea that, strong-willed is not a nice way of describing kids, I just don't agree with it. I just don't agree with it because I think strong-willed is a really beautiful thing. We want strong people. We want people with strong wills in this world. We want people who, a lot of times I've said this before, but my strong-willed kids are also my justice kids, my fair fighters. They're the ones who are like fighting for the underdog in class and making sure everybody's treated fairly. So there's a lot around it too. So I don't think we should like stifle the fact that they're strong-willed. And I also don't think we have to come up with other words to make it seem more palatable. And that's where I think this world of like, they just have big feelings, or when we describe a child who struggles to regulate their emotions, we call them feelers. They're big feelers. They're really sensitive. I'm not saying that they're not, right? Like I've worked with a lot of kids who I would describe that way. But if I'm being really honest, after working with so many different kids, thousands of kids throughout the years, I think all kids are deeply feeling. I think all kids are sensitive. I just think it gets expressed differently in every child, right? So I have some kids who used to be very quiet, let's say when I was teaching, and they would kind of prefer my company versus their peers. And they were deeply feeling. They were constantly observing things around them. Now, that never presented as defiance. That didn't present as a child who was struggling to control their emotions or manage or not engage in challenging behaviors. Nothing like that was happening. That it was a very sensitive child. They were a very deeply feeling child. They were constantly taking things in and observing and watching and coming up with their own sort of ideas around what was happening. They were also really sweet and like had this tenderness to them. So I think when we look at kids who might display more defiant behavior and go, oh, they're all just deep feelers or something like that. Again, like I like the people who teach these terms. I think it's awesome. And I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just saying broaden that and just don't be afraid to say all kids feel a lot. All kids are sensitive. I actually think kids come into this world as the most sensitive beings, right? And they absorb things and they just express it differently. Some kids move more. Some kids express it through behavior. Some kids express it through withdrawing and being really quiet. So I think the better question isn't to think about like, are they highly sensitive? Okay, like we can make the case that all kids are. I think what we want to think about is like all kids are highly sensitive. All kids are feeling things. My child expresses it in this way. My child does it like this. This is what it looks like for my child when they're overstimulated. Because then we can get somewhere. Right? So I think when we look at kids and we start to say things like, what I think ends up happening, and it's not always the case, but we say something like they're just so sensitive and they can't help it. We almost treat it like because of this heightened sensitivity to everything going on around them, they can't help but punch the kid next to them. Like something like that, which doesn't even really make sense if we think about what we're saying. But we want something that feels a little easier to swallow than like, I just might have a kid who exhibits a lot of defiance when things don't go their way. Now, again, if you're looking at it with just complete neutrality, that's okay. That kid's just showing you what they need. They're just communicating something. Like it's really hard for me to manage when things don't go my way. I really like to control my outside environment because it helps me feel safe. Okay, fair. So if a child's going to do that, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to think to myself, well, I got to get this. I have to try to help this kid learn that they don't have to control everything around them to feel safe. I have to teach them how to feel safety within. Well, how do I do that? Okay, well, one is I got to teach them how to tolerate frustration. I have to put them in multiple experiences where they're not going to get their way, and I have to show them that they're okay. The way I show them they're okay is I have to stay really regulated. I can't sit and scream at them and yell at them. I have to say to them, I get it. This is super hard when you don't get your way, but I know you can get through this. And we're going to wait until you're completely calm before we do anything else. So if you want to cry for 20 minutes, it's fine. I'm not moving. I'm not going anywhere. I'll wait. Right? So we're going to think about these things differently. We're not going to just kind of encapsulate it with like an umbrella term of like heightened sensitivity. That could all be true. Again, I'm not saying it's not, but go a step further. Go a step further. And again, I always say this, but like all kids are sensitive. All kids are feelers. All kids experience things at a much greater frequency or degree of sensitivity than we do as adults, right? So You want to think about, how does that get expressed? What are they showing me? What is their behavior communicating? Don't get super lost in like all the terms and the things. If you have a child that you describe as highly sensitive, go a step further, right? It happens a ton. I coach several parents who have kids who they describe as highly sensitive, and I love it. And I agree with them. I think they are. But I want to know more. So I will say to them, okay, tell me how that shows up. Can you describe your child as an emotional love bug? What does that mean? Why would you call them that? How do you see that? What is it? How do you notice that? Because that's what we want to get at. We want to figure out the why behind the behavior so we can then give them the skills that they need to move through some of the challenging behaviors that you're observing. So that's what I would tell you regarding like the way we might use some of these words and these terms. Again, like I am a fan of a lot of the people who teach on these things. Like I love the site with the two women who do, is it Big Little Feelings? I think that's what they're called. I love Dr. Becky from Good Inside. I think she brings a lot of value in terms of teaching the importance of like validating an emotion and letting our kids experience things without taking it on ourselves, and being able to hold a boundary. You know, I think there's a lot of value to a lot of the things that they're bringing to the table. I also think this is somewhat new dialogue for a lot of parents. I mean, my kids are 23 and 20, and I can tell you when they were younger, there was not a lot of resources around teaching anything about emotion regulation. There was nothing about like tantrums or things like that. It was really very like behavior focused. And so when I was raising my kids, I always go back to this idea that I did a lot of it intuitively. It was just like what felt right. Now, again, I have degrees in these things, so I've certainly had some expertise, but it doesn't matter when it's your child. It's very different. So I guess I'll end it with this. I guess if like somebody said to me, like, if you just had to pick one type of parenting style, what would you pick? And I can't, like, I really can't, because I think there's a lot of good things about all of them. But this is where I would hope maybe my point of view can come through, is that I wish we could be more attuned parents. That's the word I kind of keep going back to, because when we can attune to each one of our kids' unique and specific needs, you will get so much further in terms of like connecting with them, gaining cooperation from them. And you know this, if you have more than one child, you know that they're all so different and their needs are different. So when we try to just like grab a rule book of one type of style and just apply it so rigidly, we lose the whole point of it. So when we are in the process of attunement, it requires we get quiet and still. It requires us to be present. It requires us to bring neutrality to things and say, okay, what am I seeing? Can I just name it? Right? In part, that's what PAR does, right? PAR is the whole premise of what PAR teaches. It's pausing, right? Something happens. You would typically react. Can we just pause? Can we at least just interrupt the reaction? Okay, can we acknowledge, I'm really overwhelmed when my kid is screaming about what seems like nothing. Or I'm really overwhelmed that every single night at bedtime we're up for 2 hours. I'm really exhausted and I just need some support. Or I'm bothered, I'm mad, it's hard to watch this. Whatever it is, just a quick, brief statement. Name it. Let yourself feel seen too. And then in your response, but what does my child need in this moment? If you're somebody who is not a parent listening to this and you're triggered by something and you're shifting the way you react, ask yourself, what do I need in this moment? What does this moment need from me? And then later we reflect. Why are we having such a hard time when our child's struggling to regulate their emotions? What is the story I'm telling myself about myself when my child does said behavior? Is it that I'm not good enough? I'm not a good parent? My child doesn't listen, so that's a direct result of my poor job in parenting them. Whatever it is, these are not true stories, but this is what we tell ourselves. So then when we see that on display, that story gets triggered, and then we react because we want to shut it down so fast. So again, attuned parenting is more of the aim, because you are trying to understand your child. Again, not in a complicated way, just simplify it with those 4 steps. But that is what I would tell you, because again, raising my kids, and I made a gazillion mistakes, you guys, but I was always trying to figure out, how do I attune to them? How do I figure out how to solve this without maybe taking it away from them? How do I let them have the hard moment? And what do I need to work through so that it doesn't feel so terrible watching it happen? So those are just some things to think about. So anyways, that's my take on all those things. So hopefully those answers are satisfactory. But again, I'm not ever here to disparage someone else's work. I stand on other people's shoulders who have come out and done things like this. And teach on these things, and I think there's always wisdom in all of these approaches and different ways that we can use them. So I will leave it there, you guys. So again, coaching is full through the end of August, but I am opening discovery call spots because I have 2 spots opening in September. So if you guys would like to get on my schedule and you would like 12 weeks of high touch, high support coaching, you get to text me, voice message me, we call each other, we're in constant contact essentially, so that we can make some really big shifts and changes in your home so you can move through those moments of feeling so reactive, so overwhelmed, to feeling just equipped, confident, steady, centered, and really understanding what your child needs. It's a complete game changer. So anyways, I will leave the link in the show notes if you guys want to book a call, and I will talk to you again next week.